Hi, hello everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the opening ceremony of the 19th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic, and Social Sustainability. This year organized here in Ljubljana at the University of Ljubljana at the Faculty of Arts. This year, as we will get to know in the following days, it is focused on the topic is decentering sustainability towards local solutions for global environmental problems. More on these topics will be spoken shortly by two of our local co-organizers, who I invite up on stage in just a minute. And afterwards, some delegates from the university, from the faculty, and of course from the research network will just say a couple of words. So without further ado, I invite Veronika Zavratnik, research and teaching assistant at the Department of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology here at the Faculty of Arts, and Associate Professor Jaka Repić, also from the Department of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology, Faculty of Arts. So please.
Thank you, and good morning to Rector of the University, Professor Majdic, to Vice Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Professor Esche, to all the colleagues from the Common Ground Research Network, and of course to all of the conference participants. So it is our great privilege and pleasure to welcome you today for this 19th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic, and Social Sustainability, also on behalf of the two other members of the local organizing committee, Ana Svetel and Dr. Blaž Bajić. So we have worked closely with the Common Ground Research Network in organizing this conference and titled it, as Blaž already mentioned, Decentering Sustainability Towards Local Solutions for Global Environmental Problems. Just to briefly, very briefly, explain why we have titled it like that. So humanity has become a major environmental force, and in recent decades, we have used the term Anthropocene to describe the vast range of environmental processes in which natural as well as human activities are intertwined to such an extent that it is basically pointless to continue to distinguish between them. As we have also emphasized in the special focus, humanity shares one planet, but we do not necessarily live in one and the same world. We live in different places, in different societies, in different ecologies, and we do not necessarily share the same ideas, practices, or relationships with the environment. For this reason, hegemonic, so-called one-world solutions may not be sufficient in contemporary times to cope with the economic, health, social, environmental, and other problems. On the contrary, these problems, even crises sometimes, are often unintended consequences of this very one world that promotes and even accelerates growth, extractivism, and consumerism, and thereby perpetuates these unsustainable systems.
So with this year's special focus, we wanted to open up a space to talk about alternative, vernacular, local, traditional, neglected, and indigenous knowledges and practices. And we wanted to consider sustainability not only from our central position, but from new angles and perspectives. We also wanted to create a place for interdisciplinary discussions and attract scholars from different disciplines. But since we have an anthropological background, we wanted to give this conference a strong anthropological and geographical note. And with this in mind, we invited our keynote speakers. Today, we are joined here by Katja Vintar Mally, geographer from Faculty of Arts, a scholar in issues of sustainability and environmental protection. Tomorrow, Veronika Strang will join us, an environmental anthropologist from Durham University, who has done monumental work on human engagements with water. And on the third day, we will be joined by Thomas Hieland Eriksson, an anthropologist addressing social and environmental changes in global context. The logistical part of this conference, though, still reflects the multidisciplinary approach, as some parts of the conference will take place outside our faculty, under the trees of Ljubljana, online, if you will attend some of the online sessions, and at the Research Center of Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts, where we will meet in a slightly less formal setting this evening. And as the last words from our local organizing committee, we wish all conference participants, emerging scholars and students a pleasant stay and many rewarding discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaka and Veronica. So up next, I would like to invite the On Sustainability Research Network Chair, Professor David Humphreys. Please.
Hi, hello everyone. So another warm welcome from me to the 19th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic and Social Sustainability. So for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm David Humphreys, Emeritus Professor of Environmental Policy at the Open University, and I'm the English Language Research Network Chair for Common Ground's Sustainability Research Network. We also have a Spanish Research Network Chair who's not able to be with us this week. So welcome not only to the conference, but to the community, an active and thriving international network of researchers and other professionals working on sustainability as scholars, policymakers, practitioners and activists. And it's been a real pleasure working on the organisation of this conference with the local organising committee, Veronica and Blaz, who we've just heard from, and Anna and Jaka, thank you very much for setting up an excellent range of keynote and plenary speakers. Without you, this conference would not have happened. So our special focus this year is on decentering sustainability towards local solutions for global environmental problems. And there's 4 themes embedded within this year's special focus. Theme 1 is legacies, heritage, tradition, local ecologies and knowledge. Theme 2 is extraction of food, water, energy, resources, and so on. Theme 3 is the digital sustainability, smart communities, green technologies, but also the problem of electronic waste. Theme 4 is sustaining crisis, degrowth, alternative economies, and greenwashing. So this special focus foregrounds the connectivity between the local and the global. With climate change, for example, or global heating, as it's now often referred to, the spatial effects from a heating planet will be highly localized. They'll play out in different ways in different geographical spaces around the world, which leads to a question that is central to our work this week, and that is, what exactly is the relationship between the local and the global when we consider global environmental problems? In terms of causation, global level systems and structures of economic and political power shape and affect what happens at the local level. But localized actions can also have global impacts and consequences. So a political decision taken, for example, in a place where economic and political power is concentrated, Washington, DC is just the obvious example, I guess, can have far-reaching impacts that influence the policies and actions of other governments, businesses, and international organizations. A decision by a transnational corporation, for example, such as ExxonMobil, which posted record profits this week, to construct new oil rigs will have consequences in terms of economic growth and increased carbon dioxide emissions. So in terms of the causation of global environmental problems and the solutions to them, which is what our focus will be this week, the local and the global are inextricably interconnected, constantly influencing and reshaping one another. The term globalization, of course, captures the increasing extensification and intensification of social relations on a worldwide scale, with what happens in one place affecting what happens elsewhere. The late philosopher Bruno Latour, who passed away 4 months ago, coined the term action at a distance to denote that people, groups and organizations can exercise power and help determine what happens socially, politically, environmentally, in spaces they may never have visited or perhaps not even have heard of. So a key question when considering how power may be exercised from a distance is finance. Who controls the money? International financial flows enable businesses around the world to secure loans. If a business refused a loan in one financial centre, might be able to secure it elsewhere. Many investment banks have proclaimed a commitment to addressing climate change and other global environmental problems. Some have very impressive corporate social responsibility statements, but they continue to lend to businesses and governments for oil and coal mining, with consequences for global heating. So global environmental processes, just staying on this focus of the relationship between the global and the local, a global process, whether that's political, economic, social or environmental, never arrives intact in a local space. These processes always collide and interact with local on the ground realities. Global heating, for example, will clearly affect different geographical spaces in different ways. Mountain ranges, for example, will suffer loss of glacial ice, with consequences for mountain communities, because it will affect the seasonal glacial melt, which communities rely on for fresh water. Coastal areas will suffer from rising sea levels. But as well as physical geography, social and cultural factors also matter hugely. Gender relations, class and race can have a profound impact on who is most affected by global heating. The sociologist Anne Karpf of London Metropolitan University has found that women suffer more from the effects of global heating than men, especially in the gender unequal societies of the global south. In Africa, for example, women are usually expected to secure water for their families, but as freshwater sources dry up, women now spend more time every day walking to collect water. The climate crisis is also creating a new generation of child brides. In Malawi and Mozambique, some men whose families have been impoverished or displaced by climate change are resorting to selling their daughters for to earn a dowry. The activist Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, who those of you that were at Grenada last year will remember, she came up in discussion. She's identified the same problem in Uganda, where girls have been married very young for a dowry, as heat waves, drought and floods have reduced crop harvest, leading to worsening poverty. There's two ways that local places and local people can respond to global environmental problems. One is adaptation in place. Remain where you are and adapt to the changing environment around you. So just one example, the southern Bangladesh is suffering increased salinization of water due to increased and more intense weather events, such as cyclones, which push seawater onto the land and upriver, and that's changed the ecology of the south of Bangladesh, with the result that growing rice is no longer possible in Khulna province. The local people have adapted by shrimp farming and saline tolerant vegetable farming. A second type of adaptation in place is the development of new infrastructure. The Indian American policy analyst Parag Khanna has argued that people should cease investing in expensive homes that can't be moved and instead start thinking of mobile real estate. He argues we should be designing for an age of perpetual mobility. Buildings, he suggests, should be designed for mobility so that they can be dismantled and reassembled elsewhere as environments change. In the world he forecasts, relocation will be more common of infrastructure that until now we've tended to view as fixed and immobile. A second way people can respond at the local level to global environmental problems is migration. We now have a new category of refugee, the environmental refugee, someone who moves in search of an environment that is more supportive of human life after the environment where they were living becomes less habitable. But migration can entail significant risks to safety for many refugees, many of whom travel through areas suffering from civil conflict or cross water in unsafe vessels. But crucially, migration will not affect only people. All species are now starting to migrate in response to global heating. There's altitudinal migration, is when species seek cooler climates by going uphill, up mountains or up hills. Or they migrate latitudinally towards the poles. But sooner or later, if global heating really does kick in, as the predictions are it will, there'll be no more space left to migrate. When you get to the poles or the top of the mountain, then the species run out of space. So this will be the century of migration, not just of people, but of all species, in response to the global problem of climate change will affect localities around the world as a result of this. So an awareness of the interaction between the local and the global is necessary to understand global environmental problems. It's a dynamic two-way process. The global sets the overarching framework within which local changes take place, but accumulated changes at the local level can affect global processes or set in train new processes that will have local consequences. This conference is ideally placed to give voice to many of the new visions and research on sustainability, with delegates attending this week from all around the world. It's good to see that we have, in 2 days' time, we'll have 18 delegates attending from Bhutan, the country that gave the world the greatest happiness principle. I'm sure that this conference will play an important role in opening up conversational space on new options and alternatives for addressing global environmental problems at the local level. I look forward to working with you and learning from you over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor David Humphreys, for this already very interesting speech. With this, I would like to invite Philip Kalantzis-Cope, the Chief Social Scientist at the Common Ground Research Network, to join me up on stage. Please.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. There we go. That's a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to be as brief as possible. I'm really honored to be here. It's been over a year worth of planning and conversation, and it's been well worth the wait. And I really want to thank the local committee for all that they've done. One of the great things that we get to do as an organization is expose an international group to work that is done in local context. And so this is one of those ways that we can do it. So thank you very much. I'm going to talk just about the experience of the next few days. We've talked about the themes. I just want to make sure that you understand all that there is to offer. The first thing I want to talk about is, you know, we don't have program books anymore. One of the things coming out of COVID, we said we never want to print a program book ever again. And we want to do it for 2 reasons. One, for the most obvious, you know, it's a lot of paper that we just dump at the end. And the other thing that we have done is during the pandemic is what we wanted to do is really think deeply about the future of scholarly communication and where conferences live within that ecosystem. So the Scholar app, well, the whole platform, which we've been building ourselves for about 10 years now, we built this event application on there. And so we draw you in there for a number of reasons. One of it is that we want to use this as a kind of time capsule, right? So all of the online delegates, you'll see a tab there, they have uploaded digital content, which is their presentations. We also encourage you, whether it's today or tomorrow or when you go home, to record yourself and upload your presentation too. And what we want to do is to make sure that this is a resource that you can always return to. So whether it's in a year or 2 years that this conference goes on, and you can not only view the content, but everyone has their profile page, you can connect with people. And so that's the kind of principle behind what we are doing there. You'll see some buttons on the right-hand side of the program. One is discuss. So when you click discuss, you can go into that board for that presentation. And if you didn't get to ask a question in the presentation, you can put that question there and the presenter will see that and hopefully respond to you. If you press follow, there's another button called follow. There is a tab where all of those presentations that you are following will be. But then if you press that, if there's comments within that space, you will see that comment as well. So we're on a kind of new experiential journey here, but our principles are how can we capture as much of the content and conversation that happens within these walls and make it accessible to our group over time. The other thing that we want to do is get you out of these rooms. We love these, it's great to talk in these formats, but we also want to think of other ways of engaging. And so we have a welcome reception this evening. We have information about that outside. We have a conference dinner, which is a few spots left. It'll be a wonderful thing. So if you want to join us for that. And then on day 3, we have our case study day. And so what that means is we'll all go out. We're going to learn more about the trees of this city. And I don't know if you ever had a chance to walk around, but it'll be a wonderful day where we get to, think about our context and also talk in different ways. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is that after this, we are going into a session type called a talking circle, and the talking circles are broken up by the themes of the conference. And really what I'm asking you to do is just go and pick one of those that best fits your area of research and introduce yourself. Say where you've come from, the kinds of work that you do. And it's just really a way for us to make those first personal connections. So I'm going to leave it at that. But again, I'm really thankful to be here. I'm thankful to be here in person. Again, this is the second year we've been back in person. It's lovely to see everyone's faces. So I appreciate you all coming here. It's no easy feat traveling still, the emotional and existential angst that comes with it. So I am really grateful for you all. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to hand it back.
Thank you very much. Next up, I would like to invite the Associate Dean of Doctoral Studies and Research at the Faculty of Arts here at the University of Ljubljana, Associate Professor Sašo Jerše. Please.
Gospod Direktor, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, the world is out of joint. Exhausted by visions, tortured by nightmares, lonely, a hero in Shakespeare's drama Hamlet, a virtuous man, cries in despair. The world is out of joint. Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. Today, faced with numerous perils of our times of unprecedented intensity and scope, we can cry alike. The world is out of joint. And yet, the sustainability paradigm to which you will devote your attention in the following days is to give us remedy from those perils, to design possible solutions, and to nourish our hopes. For hope, namely, with virtue on its side, and virtu, the capacity to keep the strings of times in hands, is beyond doubt the most sustainable of all men's endeavors. The world is out of joint. Oh, cursed spite that I was ever born to set it right, cried Hamlet in his despair. Encouraged by his hope, however, he finally concluded with an invitation, a plea for more valuable future times. Nay, come, let's go together. I wish you an inspiring conference. Thank you for being here. Feel welcome at our university.
Thank you very much. Lastly, I would like to invite Professor Gregor Majdic, Director of the University of Ljubljana, to also join me on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues and friends, I'm really pleased to be here, and I assure today this is not a phrase. Environmental issues have been close to my heart for many years. I have a disclaimer to make. I was an environmental activist in my student years, and I was one of the organizers for the first environmental demonstrations in former Yugoslavia that I'm still. The world is facing the crisis. We got out of the pandemic. We faced the war in Ukraine, very close to our doors. But the most important crisis for me is the climate crisis. We can see that the world is warming up. There are problems in many parts of the world. Although in some parts of the Europe, like Slovenia, we still don't feel these consequences as harsh as in some other parts of the world, like Africa, with severe droughts, with Asia in floods. Although also in Slovenia, we were a little bit of shock in last summer when we had a huge forest fires, and when parts of Slovenia, because in Slovenia, we always say that one natural commodity that we have plenty is water. But last year in Slovenia, we have problems with water, with drinking water in the littoral region. And this was the sign, I think, also in Slovenia, that there is a time for alarm. But I also see a lot of problems, and what I think is a big problem in the current discussion of environmental issues, that I have doubts that we are really discussing always the real problems and finding the real solutions. I got some enemies in the animal community because I'm claiming that cows are not the largest problem. Yeah, they are a problem. The livestock breeding is part of the problem. But I have serious doubts that milk that I buy in a shop that comes from the cow in the high mountain pasture in Slovenia has higher carbon footprint than soy milk that's highly processed and comes from the soy breed in Brasilia, in the places where the tropical rainforest was cleared for growing the soy. We have to admit, we have to a lot of so-called marginal lands where we cannot grow wheat, soy, corn. Even in Slovenia, we have a lot of mountain pastures, and the only sustainable agriculture there is livestock. In Africa, what we will do in regions like Sahel and other parts of Africa, where poor soil and harsh climate conditions, will we just tell these people stop livestock breeding and what, start with that, or we will provide food for them? So we really have to think what are the issues and what are the solutions. If we go from the food production, are electrical cars a real solution? If we get the electricity from the coal power plants, don't we just switch the environmental pollutions from one place to another? Maybe the cities have cleaner air, but the areas where we have coal power plants, they are still polluted. And then the energy production, is green energy really available in such amounts that we can replace it? Or we need some other sources of like nuclear power plants? And I think these are issues that we have to discuss and we have to find the solutions. And here, I think conferences like this are really important because they bring together different fields. Because we won't find the solutions just with the energy field or with the mechanical engineers to build better cars. We have to also convince people to change their mode of life, how to use more public transport. For example, I think that one of the most, possibly the best mitigations measures could be, and this is my personal opinion, so don't attack me, but I think tax on transport throughout the world would be one of the very effective measures to reduce the pollution. Why we have to eat blueberries in January in Slovenia? I don't think we have to. We can stop this transport and we can, and this could have a huge impact, but I think the social sciences, humanities, law schools, economic sector, humanities, they have to make analysis how to convince people to accept these changes in the society that are really needed if we want to save our planet. At the end, I would just like to say, I use the word save our planet. We won't destroy the planet. The planet will remain. It's old about 5 billion years and will, according to the astronomers, it will stay like that for several billion years. We will destroy ourselves. 100 years after we will gone, the world will forget that we will hear, okay, there will be some remains of our buildings, but the nature will find its way. Okay, we will destroy some species together with us. And I think that's maybe also the time that we start to talk more about destroying ourselves than destroying the planet, because maybe the people who are running the world, who were mentioned in the talk, like big companies, maybe they're not so sensitive to the nature, but maybe they will listen or hear, we will talk that we will destroy the planet for our children and our grandchildren. And maybe that would be one approach how to make more people hear that there is a problem, there is a global crisis, and that we have to find the solutions and we have to find them soon. So thank you very much. I wish you a very successful conference. Unfortunately, I look at the program. I wish I would have time to be here more, but I have other obligations. But I'm sure there will be a lot of good discussions and hopefully some real solutions for our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to all the speakers. Thank you, Associate Dean. Thank you, Rector. With these speeches, I can only say that, again, thank you all, everyone, for joining us. I also wish everyone fruitful, productive discussions in the following days, and would like to now invite you to stay here in this room for our first keynote speaker, our first keynote session. The lecture will be given by Professor Katja Vintar Mally, an associate professor at the Department of Geography here at the Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana. Now, her resume is so rich that so that I don't forget something important, I will just have to read. In 2003, she received her master's degree in landscape ecology with environmental protection. In 2006, she obtained her Ph.D. in geography with the thesis entitled Contradictions between Environmental Protection and Socio-economic Development in Developing Countries. She holds the chair for environmental protection at the Department of Geography and teaches courses on environmental protection and sustainable development, such as environmental geography, geography of environmental resources, urban ecology. Additionally, she devotes her work to regional geography, also teaching courses on geography of North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southwest Asia. Her research focus and this interest, among other, encompass the topics of sustainable development, sustainable development indicators, sustainable use of environmental resources, environmental protection, and regional development. She's a member of the department's research group and participates in its research program entitled Sustainable Regional Development of Slovenia, and is currently involved in several national and international research projects. List of her positions is so vast that it includes everything from student activities to being a vice dean at the university, at the faculty. So I won't go into that. But as this short CV, this short description already gives a hint, Katja Vintar Mally is definitely a person who knows a thing about sustainable development. So with this, I would like to invite her to join me here up on stage and present her lecture. So, Katja, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here today with you. And I was thinking a lot, what should be the focus of my presentation today? So who's sustainability? Who doesn't love sustainability? Who doesn't love sustainable development goals? Better, longer, healthier lives, more education, freedoms, equal rights, social justice. Sustainability is like delicious chocolate cake or a glass of good wine or a walk on a tropical beach at sunset. But all that comes at the price or with side effects. So today I'm going to talk about those, about the price of socioeconomic development paid by the environment, and about who is currently living sustainably, perhaps also at the expense of others. So let's take a look at broader context, please. It's not important that you don't see the details. However, you can see on one hand the driving forces, and on the other hand, the impacts. What I'm talking about, efforts to improve the quality of human life are probably as old as human society itself. but the continuing increase in the socio-economic well-being of a steadily growing number of people has increasingly impacted the carrying capacity of the environment. The process, as you can see, has been accelerating greatly since the Industrial Revolution. And after the Second World War, we somehow hoped that by raising incomes, other development problems will somehow solve themselves. Of course, they didn't. That didn't happen. So the awareness that economic development must take into account planetary limits has grown only in the last 50 years, after the UN conference in Stockholm in 1972, with the landmark study Limits to Growth in the same year, which was one of the first to point out the limited availability of natural resources. What we found out in the last decades is that limited resources really aren't the problem. The pollution, the crossing the limits, the planetary boundaries is really the problem. This is what climate change is all about. So in the 1980s, the paradigm, as you probably all know, of sustainable development began to develop. And in 1992, it was really groundbreaking that at the UN conference in Rio de Janeiro, the Agenda 21 was adopted and required pursuing. What it really required was to pursue the possibilities for socioeconomic progress while staying within the existing environmental limits and respecting the carrying capacities of our environment. And as you can see, what changed? Actually nothing. On the left-hand side, you can see the growing population numbers. You can see growing GDP. You can see growing transportation, growing use of energy. On the right-hand side, you can see growing concentrations of gases in the atmosphere, agricultural use of land, reducing forested land, and so on and so on. So if we go a step further, thank you. Scientists have highlighted this problem of not respecting planetary boundaries several years ago. For example, here you can see the results of the study by O'Neill and co-authors. By Stephen and co-authors, pointing out that at the time being, we are exceeding the limit of the so-called planetary, of the so-called safe operating space for 4 of 9 planetary boundaries. Climate change, biodiversity loss, especially the loss of genetic diversity, interfering into biogeochemical flows, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, land system change, and biosphere. Sorry, I have already mentioned biosphere, but what they added last year was fresh water. So the extensive use of green water, and they have already estimated that we are in the zone of increasing risk with novel entities, so with chemical pollution. So really we are only within the safe operating space still when talking about blue water, so fresh water use, and stratospheric ozone depletion and ocean acidification. So there we have the limitations of planetary carrying capacities on one hand, and efforts to provide adequate well-being for a growing world population. You have already mentioned that global problems arise from, well, from local desires, from local aspirations to improve well-being, to achieve socio-economic development. So they become global problems, and then they affect, again, local environments. And now I would like to talk about decoupling. You have probably heard about this idea. It was OECD in 2001 that wrote environmental strategy for the first decade of the 21st century. And as a goal, they defined decoupling environmental pressures from economic growth while continuing to satisfy human needs. So here we have all the elements of sustainable development, of sustainability. So we have economic growth, we have economic goals, we have environmental goals. So decreasing environmental pressures, and we have social goals as well. We have satisfying human needs, which is actually socio-economic goals. Okay, and what I really love is the definition they have created later on, saying that decoupling really means breaking the link between environmental bads and economic goods. And what kind of decoupling do we really have? So if we take a look, the economic activity is growing, and at the same time, also the resource use is growing. So here, when both are growing, we actually have no decoupling when resource use grows at least as rapidly as economic output. But then we have this modest progress. It's relative decoupling. It's a situation when resource use grows less rapidly than economic output. So both are growing. It's just that economic development or output grows, let's say, at 3%, and resource use grows at 2%. What we are really striving for is absolute decoupling. So it's when resource use declines, so we use less per unit of economic output, and economic output grows. So probably now you're thinking, oh, where is degrowth? Sustainability really isn't about degrowth. It's still based on economic growth. So if we go further, so what kind of decoupling do we have? Today I'm going to talk about resource decoupling later on. So to sever the link between the use of resources and economic activity, let's say GDP growth. But what we would love to talk about is really impact decoupling. So lowering environmental pressures and impacts. And there is also well-being decoupling. It's hard to define well-being. It's hard to define sustainability. But let's say that well-being can be progress in human development, taking into account also environmental pressures. This is already all included in our strategic documents. We all love strategic documents because in theory, we know everything, of course. Agenda 2030, great document, adopted in 2015. If you read goals carefully, you'll find out that there are two important goals regarding decoupling. The first one is goal number 12, saying that we would like to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. We like that, chocolate cake. Goal number 12 is even more specific, saying goal number 8, saying within target 8.4, and I quote, improve progressively through 2030 global resource efficiency in consumption and production, and endeavor to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. Perfect. And it goes on, with developed countries taking the lead. Now, that's new information. If we read carefully, it says also that the target, that we have the target of ensuring per capita economic growth, specifically a growth of at least 7% in gross domestic product in the economically least developed countries. So it's very clear. We still want economic growth, just using less. Further on, since you are all now in the European Union, and Slovenia is a member state of the European Union, we should also take a look at our local, let's say, or regional context. The European Union adopts every few years environmental action program. So we had now 7th environmental action program. We love that too, because it says, and I again quote, the Union has agreed to stimulate the transition to a green economy and to strive towards an absolute decoupling of economic growth and environmental degradation. The same strategic goal is maintained also in the 8th Environment Action Program, which was adopted last year. So we have very ambitious goals, and we have also European Green Deal that at the end of the year 2019, new European Commission presented, saying that it's a new growth strategy that aims to transform the European Union into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy where there are no net emissions of greenhouse gases in 2050, and where economic growth is decoupled from resource use. So decoupling is everywhere, obviously, we just didn't know. And national documents, I won't go there, but it's also there, at least in Slovenian documents. So this was in theory. Now let's go to practice. What we can see here is annual material use or consumption globally from 1970s onwards. And those of us who lived in the 70s, altogether we were using roughly about 27 billion tons of raw materials, of everything. So biomass, fossil fuels, mineral and non-mineral ores, non-metallic minerals. And the last data, I'm very sorry, are for 2017, saying that we were using 92 billion tons. So in the 70s, we were using about 7 tons per capita. Nowadays, we are using more than 12 tons per capita. Nice progress. Of course, you're going to say, oh, there is more people in the world now. I'm saying those were per capita data. So continuing the trend of steep growth in resource use, in the following decades, we can expect as many as 190 billion tons of raw materials per year to be consumed. However, the observed trend indicates a relative decoupling. How so? So you can see that the use of resources increased by 3.4 times. At the same time, the world population doubled, but the gross domestic product quadrupled. So That's why we are talking about relative decoupling. So the per capita use of natural resources is growing slower compared to GDP. Now, as I said, we would like to achieve absolute decoupling. There is quite vast literature about that, and Parik and co-authors reviewed more than 600, it's a great job, more than 600 mostly empirical articles on decoupling, and they found out there is no empirical evidence for existence of decoupling economic growth and environmental pressures to the extent necessary to prevent environmental breakdown. I'm not sure what environmental breakdown meant to them. But what we can clearly understand is that they claim there is no evidence for absolute decoupling in the literature, since it occurs only occasionally and for particular resources or environmental impacts in certain areas. And as I said before, for the most part, decoupling is only relative. Now to the question of environmental costs of human development. What I would like to show you is actually to confront the concept of human development and the concept of ecological footprint. Why do I have to do that? Because the concept of those concepts were developed separately. And while the concept of human development takes into account only indicators showing development or progress in the area of social and economic goals, the ecological footprint only takes into account, let's say, the use of resources and our environmental impacts. So here we have, it's very well known Human Development Index for 2018. I have chosen the year 2018 because this is the last year for which data for the majority of countries are available for both indicators. So human development concept, I would just like to remind you, I'm sure you are familiar with it, was introduced by the United Nations in the 90s, and the United Nations still calculate this indicator every year for all countries around the world. And this indicator is aggregated from three-dimensional indices for three major dimensions of human development. So education, standard of living, and health. Education as measured by mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling, then decent standard of living, as they call it, is measured by gross national income per capita, and what is still missing is no, what is it? I have already mentioned. So health, education, and I have blackout now. For the bird health, sorry, no, that is, so GNI, education, health, thank you. Living long and healthy life is a goal, so life expectancy. Thank you, Rector. It's not every day that Rector helps you. Personally, yeah, at lecture, I thought. Okay, thank you. So due to the method of normalization, the final value is between 0 and 1, and we all love 1, not 0, to be close to 1. Nowadays, Human Development Index is most widely used and accepted alternative to GDP. and no one argues about that. What Human Development Index or Human Development Concept overlooked or skipped is the ecological dimension. So what to do? We have several indicators or hundreds of indicators in that area. Although in the 90s, I'm obviously a huge fan of ecological footprint. In the 90s, Matthijs Wakernagel and William Rees developed the ecological footprint. It's a great idea how to measure everything that we need. So everything that we need to sustain our lifestyles, to support our way of living. So the ecological footprint is actually defined as a measure of the biologically productive and then, of course, could you go please further? Thank you. And then, of course, it takes into account also build-up land that we use for our infrastructure and areas necessary to absorb the waste. So it covers 6 components, as you can see: fishing grounds, cropland, build-up land, forest land, grazing land, and also carbon footprint. About 60% of ecological footprint is represented by carbon footprint. It's the only way how to include our emissions, so carbon emissions into ecological footprint. So the idea behind that is how extensive areas of forest would we need to absorb all the carbon that we emit. So what the calculations are really showing is a constant increase in ecological footprint. But what I love about this indicator is that at the same time, they also calculate biocapacity. So biocapacity is actually the productivity or the production of all the ecosystems around the world. To translate it, it's what we have. And ecological footprint shows what we use. So that green line there at 1.6 global hectares per person is the available biocapacity of our one and only planet that was already mentioned today. What you see at the end, almost 2.8 global hectares per capita is what we are currently using. So we are currently using the biocapacity of 1.75 planets. So you are probably wondering, how is that possible? I have already given you a clue. So carbon footprint, so all the emissions there are somewhere up there in the atmosphere are included. And here are also all the other types of pollution. Is the so it's the burden, our burden on global sinks, and at the same time exploitation of natural resources. And what I also like here is that ecological footprint, when calculated for a certain country, takes into account the production in the country minus exports plus imports. So this is really our ecological footprint. So to give you an example, today I was behaving badly. I had a banana for breakfast. I suspect it was from Colombia or somewhere from Latin America. So this is my ecological footprint now. The footprint there in Latin America, growing that certain banana. And then all the transport for banana to come to Slovenia, and so on and so on. So we cannot hide our footprint when looking at this data. And another thing, when ecological footprint exceeds the biocapacity, it's called ecological deficit. And one slide, please, further. And when biocapacity exceeds the ecological footprint, it's great. It's called ecological reserve. In the European Union, and I would really like to show you this slide before you get all the other information. In the European Union, our ecological footprint is about 4.7 global hectares per person, and the biocapacity is 2 global hectares per person. So our deficit amounts to 2.7 global hectares per person. So this is my banana now. You can see that the majority of countries in the European Union has ecological deficit. So the exemptions are Finland and Sweden and Latvia, countries with vast areas of forest. So it helps if your country has a forest. And it helps if your country has agricultural land with high yields. But we will see that later on. So let's move forward. Here you can see the map. So I'm just gonna ask one question. Whose sustainability? You can see the differences, and we will go now to another topic, population growth. So everything I'm now talking about is connected to population growth. So I have, to illustrate the trends, I have chosen year 1990, and then again, as I said, 2018, which is the last year we have calculations for ecological footprint. So during that period, you can see the population growth around the world. In 1990, we were about 4 billion. In 2018, we were around 7.7 billion. Now we are more than 8 billion. So we should keep that in mind. And so what were other trends? I have to check with you. So first one is great, increase in average human development index. What used to be average result around the world in 1990, so 0.6, is nowadays quite modest result. Only 49 worst performing countries around the world have result lower than 0.6 nowadays. Increase in GNI per capita, perfect. Agenda 2030, the goal is achieved, almost doubled. Population growth, okay, that we already saw. Increase in ecological footprint. From 14 billion global hectares around the world to almost 21.2 billion around the world. That can be good. Let's take a look at ecological footprint per capita from 2.6 to 2.8 global hectares. Oh, and yeah, we saw the map. So for Yemen, reality is half of a hectare, and in Qatar, it's more than 14 hectares, global hectares. Oh, what is global hectare? Global hectare is a hectare with an average global biocapacity. So it's a hectare that does not exist. It's purely mathematical, statistical concept. And increase in biocapacity. As I said, it helps if you have forests and if you intensify agriculture. However, from 11 to 12 billion global hectares, that means that the biocapacity, the available biocapacity during the last 3 decades decreased from 2 to 1.6 global hectares per capita. So logically, the deficit increased. And let's take a look at one lovely comparison. So again, the period 1990, 2018 is under study here. And let's take a look at the comparison of Human Development Index and ecological footprint on one hand, and GNI per capita and ecological footprint on the other hand. So those are data for all the countries around the world that had available calculations, 176 of them, as you can see, and the correlation is positive and high. So the purple colored countries are the members of the European Union. So you have direct comparison where we are and where the rest of the world is. So the correlation is high. And how was this the same correlation 30 years ago? So there's another problem because more than 50 countries around the world don't have calculations for both years and both indicators. However, for the rest, we can compare. What I found out is that the correlation between GNI per capita and ecological footprint per capita nowadays is even higher around the world. Or let's say I can guess that that the dependency nowadays of ecological footprint on incomes is even higher. And for the European Union, I did the same calculations and comparisons for the European Union member states. Luckily, the correlation nowadays is lower. So we have here this optimistic trend. If you see small numbers on top of graphs, you can also see that the correlation between GNI per capita and ecological footprint per capita is higher compared to correlation between Human Development Index and ecological footprint per capita, which makes sense. And I wanted to dig deeper. So, thank you. Let's see the trend. So the change in that period. So you can see Human Development Index change. And so the conclusion is all the countries around the world, with one exception, manage to achieve progress in human development. So in decent standard of living, in education and health. And yes, it was only one country that struggled, that is Libya. We know after the Arab Spring and all the problems that the country had with civil war and so on, this is not a surprise. However, it's just a small difference of 0.003 between 1990 and 2018. So all other countries have positive values. And now to the change in ecological footprint, you can see that the majority of countries, while increasing Human Development Index, also increased ecological footprint. 46 countries in blue are the exception. So this looks promising, what's happening in those countries. So I went one step further. And here is the comparison of change in GNI per capita in those countries and in ecological footprint. What we can see is that, let's say during the last 3 decades, 14 countries around the world lowered their GNI per capita. How is this possible? Okay, one obvious answer can be crisis. The other possible answer can be, okay, population growth in those countries is faster compared to growth of incomes of GNI. And the rest of the world is doing fine. We have some outliers there, China, Myanmar, Vietnam. So we're gonna ignore them and go further. Now let's zoom in. All those countries, all those outliers would be blue colored. So now I was thinking, when we are talking about decoupling, so we should take a look how fast was the growth of incomes compared to the growth of the use of natural resources, if that's what ecological footprint, let's say, is showing, although it's not, but it's an approximation. So let's try to classify countries. I think, okay, so the orange and red countries are those in which ecological footprint per capita was growing faster compared to GNI per capita. This can't be good. So at the same time, we have this, this unfavorable environmental trend. And in 11 countries, on the far left, that are colored red, we have also unfavorable economic trends, because those countries experienced a decrease in GNI per capita. As you can see, hopefully, the names of the countries, and if you are familiar with their local background, you can explain that. So those are countries like Libya or Yemen that are struggling for different reasons. So there is no decoupling there, that's for sure. Now let's put our hopes into the rest of the world, the blue and green countries. So that's where the change in GNI per capita was bigger compared to the change in ecological footprint. And within that group, one subgroup stands out, 42 countries, green countries, that managed to lower their ecological footprint while their economy was growing. And also, as we saw, they have achieved progress in human development. Among them are also 15 European Union countries. Just for fun, I did another graph to show you again where European Union countries are. And if you can go please back now, back. Yes, thank you. Decoupling, at least in blue and green colored countries, we can expect the relative decoupling, but relative decoupling is something that we saw on other graphs. So that's what we have expected to see. Absolute decoupling is of absolute interest here. So green countries, but again, we would need now detailed analysis of each and every one of them to see if they are really achieving absolute decoupling, how they are doing. I mean, how it is possible for them to achieve that. And again, I would like to mention that those are countries at different stages of development, let's say human development. So, and this is just a snapshot, what is going on. If we now, what's sustainable or what's sustainability? So very simple definition is you would like to achieve very high human development. Nowadays, very high human development is defined by 0.8 in Human Development Index. So at the same time, the country should have 0.8 in human development, and the ecological footprint lower than average biocapacity in the world. So lower than 1.6 global hectares. If you analyze those data, it can happen then in some year, there is a country that fulfills both requirements, but no country in the long run. So actually no country in the world qualifies now. If we when we saw those 15 European Union countries here in green, once again, our average ecological footprint is 4.6 and global biocapacity. So our fair share is 1.6 global hectares per person. So the last 3 minutes and the last question. Whose sustainability remains to be discussed? This was just one piece of a puzzle, what I presented here. Decoupling that I think is going to be necessary to achieve sustainability. However, we should know that decoupling raises false hopes. It raises false hopes in the possibility of unlimited economic growth. So again, people look at it as a magic solution so that they wouldn't have to change their lifestyle. So the technology should save us. That's what's behind. Or somebody else should make a change in the world instead of us. And of course, permanent absolute decoupling is impossible because we know that for each and every human activity, we need two things, energy and materials. So it's impossible to do without those things. And what we are sure of is that decoupling will not happen automatically. It will be difficult to achieve and only to have some strategic documents is not going to be enough. And what we saw is that ecological deficit is growing and that the world population is growing. So as I can see it, or as I see it, developing countries have a great need, of course, to achieve better standard of living. And at the same time, they will definitely use more resources. So if we use in developed world less, I mean economically developed, of course, to be clear, in economically developed world, if we use less resources, what we're gonna create with that is only a window of opportunity for developing countries to have their fair share of resources. So going back to my introduction, it's whose sustainability or whose piece of that delicious chocolate cake. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this interesting and extremely thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure it will raise many questions for which we now have about 25 minutes of time. So yeah, please raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic to you and we can do a little circle of this. And I have already seen the first hand over there and then Professor Rector.
As you were talking, it made me think of the associate director's comments using Hamlet. I'm thinking it should be a question to sustain or not to sustain our population, is what I'm thinking, because of all the, and this is my question to you, humans are the only species that I know of that when we reach our carrying capacity, instead of having a population crash, we figure out a way to raise that carrying capacity. Have we come to that end of that road, do you think? We've raised it every time by outgassing energy and fuel from the past. That's what helped us to do that. So where do you think we'll go from that?
Okay, I'm back. Thank you a lot for this question. Yes, that's what we are counting on. Every time when we were struggling, there was some next revolution. So industrial revolution, agriculture, I mean, green revolution and so on. Well, I firmly believe that we will find a solution. I'm just not sure if it's going to mean sustainability for all people around the world. I'm going to be very critical now. I really love European Union and everything it stands for. However, I don't think that the intentions are always good. So the green transition, the digital transition, clean technologies, new technologies. As Rector before said, I'm buying a new car, electric car, of course. I wouldn't dare to buy conventional car anymore. However, where is electricity in Slovenia produced? In thermal power plants, in nuclear power plants, 1/3 of it. Only 1/3 of electricity in Slovenia is produced by hydro power plants. But I'm sure we're gonna find solution for our electricity because we have money. But what's the solution for the people that don't have money? And climate change, again, I'm referring to Rector. Yes, okay, we will probably wipe ourselves from the face of the earth, or maybe not. However, who is going to struggle? If the summer in Slovenia gets warmer, okay, I will buy air condition, no problem. But what's the solution for African people, for example? Because they have other priorities and a lack of money. So that's why I'm saying whose sustainability? Technological solutions was, and I'm going now back to the European Union, technological solutions brought progress to already rich, wealthy, I think. Do we know a revolution that brought a lot of, yes, of course, side effects were for the, let's say, green revolutions, but who owns the technology? Who makes big money? Or maybe I'm too pessimistic.
Just one quick question, although I think you raised so many questions for a long discussion, but with the slide where you showed ecological deficit, you said that the countries with large amount of forest, they have better. But I noticed that like Finland and Sweden, as you mentioned, but Slovenia has a large ecological deficit, but we always pride ourselves that we have a lot of forests, that we are one of the most forest covered countries. So why is that?
Thank you. Yes, I think that now the latest data is that Slovenia has the biocapacity of 2.2 global hectares per capita. So in terms of the European Union, our biocapacity is larger. And of course, we are very proud of our 60% of forests, I mean, territory covered by forests. Beautiful thing. However, our consumption is really excessive because our ecological footprint now amounts to 5.4 global hectares. So that's why the deficit is so high. So our biocapacity is above global average and is above the average of the European Union. However, our consumption is above average of everything. So that's why. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up about your comment about population. And thank you for your slide about population growth. My older brother was born in 1960 when the world population was 3 billion people. So in his lifetime, it's nearly tripled, which is really hard for me to get my head around because I remember him as this bratty little kid. And that huge population growth. So it's a big issue. We know population growth is going to continue to 9 or 10 billion people before it starts leveling off and declining. But there is a solution, and it's girls' education. And so if we can be fun, especially in places like Africa or other low-income countries around the world, more funding and support that can be put into that. We do have data that shows that can reduce fertility levels. And of course, the economic consequences too, we're seeing now in places like East Asia, South Korea, Japan, where fertility levels are not replaceable. And then what happens economically, trying to support the older population. It's all just so interrelated. And then with Africa, the really growing young population and the impacts of that. So, but thank you for your presentation. I appreciated it, but yeah, population growth is a huge issue.
Thank you a lot. Yes, I totally agree. I'm optimistic in that sense that now the fertility rate is dropping everywhere around the world. However, it will take time, as you have mentioned. I think that 40 to 50% of the population in Sub-Saharan Africa is younger than 15 years. And even if they are going to have just 2 or 3 children, so it's a math. I didn't even start talking about sufficiency, about degrowth. It's a whole another topic. What we are dealing here are really the driving forces behind all those trends we saw. The first driving force is population growth. The second driving force is consumption. And the third driving force, it's technology. So that's a popular equation that we know from the 70s already. It's nothing new. And what's worrying is that even when the population growth stops, so nowadays, business as usual. So even when population growth stops, the consumption is the driving force. So the aspiration to achieve higher standard of living. So that's, in my opinion, the real problem of the consumption patterns nowadays.
Thank you. Thanks. That was a fascinating talk. So much information in it. I'm going to ask you something that I'm not sure whether you can answer, so I'll rephrase it in a slightly more general sense. But what I was really interested in was some of the outliers on your graphs. So like, first of all, Vietnam, what did Vietnam do really badly? Because they managed not to increase much in terms of economic benefits, but they did increase their ecological footprint. But perhaps more positively, and I was going to reframe it as what a country's doing right, is some of the ones, actually that other graph you just put up, some of the ones down the bottom, you've got Tanzania and you've got Mozambique that are coming out really quite positively, that I was quite surprised by. So I'm just interested to know what sort of things are these countries doing that they're doing really well or even really badly, but obviously positive would be nice.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really intriguing. It was not about black and white, about doing right and doing wrong. It was really a comparison. So what we can see here, one slide. Yeah. So why I choose to zoom in and not to show the outliers. What I wanted to say is, for example, China, you can see the change in GNI per capita. well, China was obviously doing right in economic sense. However, at the same time, they have almost, well, not tripled, but they are getting their ecological footprint. However, it has to be, it's important to stress that China's ecological footprint is far lower compared to the European Union countries. I don't know it by heart now. However, so on a per capita level, they are not there yet. They have done nothing wrong. And the same goes, for example, for Myanmar. That's just the economic growth that you see here. But what's, let's say, bad is when you see the change in ecological footprint higher and higher. So, for example, what's really bad would be here. So Saudi Arabia, Iran, even Croatia, Qatar, doubling their ecological footprint. Now you have to ask the question, why? And then you have to dig deeper, look at the structure of the ecological footprint. So is it only carbon footprint? Are they increasing their use of fossil fuels, or what's behind it? Because we have to know that countries that are economically developing are naturally using more resources. They have to build their infrastructure. They are industrializing. So, and of course, they are at the same time improving the living standard of their inhabitants. So they consume more. They are building their own houses, and they are buying cars and electric appliances and so on. But when you reach a certain level of GDP, of incomes, then this growth is less rapid, or as we can see it in the European Union, it drops. If we would take a look at the structure of the European Union, we would see that this is mostly due to the fact that we are reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. So how is that possible? One lovely thing is to move your industry to developing countries. And then you have, this is all on per capita basis. So if Slovenia would now, let's say, start, what's the right word? So if there would be a population explosion, our ecological footprint would obviously drop because it's on per capita basis, as I said. So if the population growth, and this can be happening, for example, I don't know, in Tanzania or in some other African countries, they're experiencing very high population growth. And if this growth is higher compared to the growth of GNI or ecological footprint, so this seems to have lower impacts, but it's not necessary. So we would really have to take a look at absolute values. So this is just a mind game. This is just an exercise to shed some light on decoupling, not on the structure. How is this possible?
I just like to return back to the previous question about the population growth and consumerism, as you mentioned. Yeah, I completely agree. That's a big problem, not just population growth, but the economic growth of the societies. I'll just give one example that I don't know if you all know. You probably heard that rhino poaching increased majorly in the last 10 years, but I don't know if many of you know why. It's because the purchasing capacity in Asia increased so much that 20, 30 years ago, there were only a few people who could afford the rhino medicine from rhino horn. And today there are thousands or millions of people that can afford, and this has driven the demand for the rhino horns. So we have to really look at the world, how it's interconnected and how this process is interconnected if we want to make any changes.
And what's the starting point? If you have only 6 rhinos left and you kill 2, then that's 1/3. But once you had 600 rhinos and killed 2, it was just a minor number. So yeah, you should always look at the absolute values.
Thank you so much, Madam Mally. Right here. Right, thank you. I think this is such an interesting presentation. And when you began, one of the first sentences you pronounced is that economic development must take into account planetary limits. And then you went on giving details of some conflicting forces in the planet, like growing building, growing GDP, growing machinery, which you sort of made a parallel with growing gases like pollution, growing chemical products, as a whole, growing problems for the planet. And then you jumped later explaining the theory of decoupling. But in your conclusion, you explained that decoupling does not seem to be the solution, because you said that it is just giving like false hope. So I think it's worth posing this question, because you later said that maybe the solution would be to shift some of these technology, or even like the European Union, for example, like transferring some of the technology or some of your industries in developing countries. But we all know that like the data is showing that in developing countries, the ecological footprint does not have such an impact in the whole planet. So my question is, and I'm not trying to provoke anybody, are you trying to shift the problem that the European Union or the world have in developing countries? This is the question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was speaking ironically, of course, when I said for us the problem is solved. For the planet, it isn't, of course. What I'm trying to do is exactly what you highlighted. So raise the question of justice, of fairness. So what's the fair share? In developing countries, the fair share of biocapacity is 1.6 global hectares. And so it is also in Slovenia, in Germany, in Finland, everywhere. So the deficit, the deficit is always according to that average global biocapacity. And what I said, and I really mean it, is that decoupling is only one part of solution. I didn't say that it's not a solution. It's not the only solution. Or everything, of course, at the end will show in statistics as decoupling. But what we have to change here is or are our consumption habits. It's always this discussion that I'm also feeling today in this room. Developing and developed, it's all discussion. It was there, I think, already in Stockholm in 1972, and it was there in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and it reappears at every session. Who is to blame? We are pointing fingers. So you are bad guys because the population is still growing. And then, no, you are bad guys because your consumption is hilariously high. So come on, guys, can we now establish what's the fair share? Yes, we can, but if they stop having, let's say, 3-4 children, we have 1.5, they should also. So, because there's only one, that's why I've mentioned the cake. But the comparison is really bad, because natural resources aren't chocolate cake. Because natural resources are renewable or non-renewable. So a piece of that cake, luckily, renews every year. but still, it's a piece of cake that we have on a table. And of course, we in economically developed world, we are used that this huge part of cake is ours. So now you can have the rest of the cake. Oh, you used to be 1 billion, so now you are 3 billion. Well, I don't care. It's your piece of cake isn't growing, so that's yours, and that's yours. That's mine. And of course, this is now how we are gonna solve this problem. And I don't have the solution. It's not $1 million, it's not $1 billion question. The amounts are much, much higher.
There's a, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Great. I wanted to ask about colonialism. In a sense, this is a follow-up question to, I thought, the very articulate point just made. You know, I think that decoupling asks developed countries to give up their relative advantage, whether that's about oil, whether that's about power, whether that's about the production of sort of finished goods. There's a heritage of oppression behind the use of materials to benefit some countries and not to benefit others. And so this is a point that Amitav Ghosh makes quite well in his book, The Great Derangement. And so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to these graphs, speak to these ideas about decoupling in terms of the colonial project that's shaped 20th century, 19th century, 18th century global history.
That's a tough question. Thank you. I don't know how to answer, to be honest. I'm not an expert on colonialism, not even on neo-colonialism. Of course, we cannot deny or overlook the relations, the balance of power that was established already during the 19th century, 20th century, and so on. I don't know